Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, and a warm welcome to all of you for Zonta Says Now, the International Intercontinental think tank. Welcome to the July meeting of the Intercontinental think tank. This is the first meeting of the 24-26 biennium. My name is Eric Elavia, and I'm one of your hosts today. I'm speaking from Mumbai, India. This photo prompts us to think about the changes that we will initiate to build a better world for women and girls in this biennium. Before we begin, I'd like to cover some housekeeping. We are meeting today from all over the world, so please share your location in the chat line and use the chat line to ask questions and make comments. Please put your microphones on mute. Ask questions or make comments respectfully. Ask short questions and use welcoming and inclusive language. Thank you. As you can see, we have a full program today, so let's get started. It gives me great pleasure to introduce today's presentation team. Dilruba Ahmad is from Zonta Club of Chittagong, Bangladesh. Carol Theobald is from Zonta Club of Perth in Western Australia. Sue Lee and Sandra Burns are from the Zonta Club of Melbourne, Onyar in Victoria, Australia. And I'm from Zonta Club of Bombay One, India. Interestingly, we all have a strong background in education, either as educators in schools, the workplace, or the community. So, it is no surprise that today's meeting will explore the important role that education can play in creating a more sustainable world. A few days ago, it was Nelson Mandela's International Day, a time when the UN invites us to make a difference in our communities. As the UN puts in, everyone has the ability and responsibility to change the world for the better. And Mandela Day is an occasion for us all to take action and inspire change. Nelson Mandela once said, I quote, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And our speakers today reflect this sentiment. But first, for newcomers to our think tank, let's explain why Zonta says now. We use this strain to show why Zonta says now to gender equal climate action. This train was built during the Industrial Revolution, a time when humans started to put more carbon pollution into the atmosphere, where it is accumulating, forming a blanket round the planet, and causing global heating and associated extreme weather events. Extreme heat, droughts, fires, floods, and storms trigger social disruption, causing millions of people to lose their livelihoods and homes. This social disruption magnifies any existing inequality, including gender inequality. Zonta says now stops the train by advocating for governments to meet their obligations under the Paris Agreement and closing the gender gaps in leadership, education, economic opportunity, health, and safety. Life for women and girls at the end of the train is hard. Because of the drought, 9-year-old Dabur in Sudan has to walk further each day to collect water and has no time to go to school. And in Mozambique, Ayan's family lost everything in the floods and she is being sold into marriage. In Canada, Wildfire smoke triggered young Clara's asthma. Her mother, Judith, is worried she will lose her casual job as she had to take time off work to look after Claire. And Maria in Australia is 79 and has a heart ailment that made worse in extreme heat. She has no air conditioning and walks to the local library each day to sit in the cool. She's worried about how she will physically survive the summer. Floods cause problems for Freya in Germany and Ralia in Nigeria. Freya's home was destroyed. She had no insurance and had been living in temporary accommodation for over 2 years with no savings to get a permanent home. And in Nigeria, Ralia worried how she will feed her family after floods destroyed the market, taking away her livelihood. The number of women and girls living at the end of the train is increasing due to climate change. For example, studies have found that 1 degree Celsius rise in average temperature is associated with a 6% rise in violence against women. A 10% increase or decrease in average rainfall is associated with a 1% rise in child marriage. This means that a 40% increase in rainfall equates to a 4% rise in child marriage. Social disruption is a huge issue when it comes to widening gender gaps. In 2022, there were over 36 million climate refugees. And if we don't act now, this could rise to over 1 billion people by 2050. Sadly, 1 in 5 women who are refugees or displaced has experienced sexual violence. This is why Zonta says now seeks climate justice for women and girls so that they can prevent, prepare, and respond to and recover from the impacts of climate change on the same basis as men. I encourage you to go to our website to learn more about Zonta's 3 international service projects for this biennium. We are entering the 3rd phase of our signature project with the UNFPA to end child marriage in 12 countries, including India and Bangladesh. Our Climate Empower project with the UNFPA aims to prevent climate-induced gender-based violence in Madagascar, Mozambique, and South Sudan. And the LAHA project sees UNICEF's virtual safe space extended from 6 to 12 countries. LAHA enables women and girls to safely access information and services online about gender-based violence and sexual and reproductive health. Many of our international projects involve education, and we have 2 speakers today that continue on this theme. I would appreciate if you could put your questions in the chat line, as we will have a Q&A session at the end of each presentation. I'll now call upon Sue Lee from Zonta Club of Melbourne on Yarra to introduce our first speaker. Sue is currently in Alice Springs in the center of Australia. Over to you, Sue. Thank you.
I think you're muted, Sue.
I always forget that. Yeah, so let's start again. So Dr. Eugene Cordero is a professor in the Department of Meteorology and Climate Science at San Jose State University in California, and the founder of a project called Green Ninja. Green Ninja is an education project that schools can buy that uses solutions to climate and environmental problems as a lens for teaching science, and it makes it really interactive and interesting. Eugene leverages his scientific research in climate towards designing educational experiences that promote long-term changes in student attitudes and behaviours. And so today, Eugene's going to talk about his research that describes how education, if well designed, can be effective with climate action in reducing carbon emissions, and as effective as doing things like putting in solar panels or driving an electric vehicle. So it's really the starting point, and he's going to explain to us why that is so important, how you actually deal with that. And he's also going to tell us about burritos, because he's the king burrito man. King.
Well, thank you, Sue, and thank you, Zonta Says Now, for inviting me to come and share a little bit of our research with you. I'll share my screen right now, and then I look forward to questions. This is, to share some of the work that we've been doing. But I'll just start by saying I'm very impressed with the work that your organization is doing, and that I'm sure when I've had Q&As with folks like yourselves before, a lot of you are doing amazing work. And so we're all in this together and all learning and sharing with each other. So because education is part of this, I'm going to do a little bit of education. We're going to talk a little bit about climate science. I'm just going to share some resources. Then I'm going to share a little bit about the academic research that I've been working on, and then show the Green Ninja work that we're doing, which is just an application of that research. So this is me. I'm a professor. I'm a doctor. Although at San Jose State, as Sue said, I'm known as Dr. Burrito. And I'm going to share a little bit about how I got that name over the course of this talk today. I've been at San Jose State 23 years. My journey there started in California, where I got a degree in physics. I got my PhD at UC Davis in Northern California. And then I was a postdoc at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, and I was working on ozone research at the time. I continued that research in Australia, Monash University, one of the ways that I met Sue. And I was there for a number of years doing research on the ozone hole and then on climate. And as you know, this map is not to scale. Australia is about the same size as the United States. And then I returned to San Jose State. And the framework of my research has been focused on the Earth and this beautiful planet that we have, and understanding the complex interactions that happen in our climate system. And so I'm going to share a couple things about climate change. You might have seen this kind of framework, Climate Science 101. When I teach classes in climate, I often start like this, because I think it's a nice framework. And Eric did a great job. I love the analogy of the train. I think that's excellent. I hadn't seen that before. This is another framework you could use that starts with it's warming, it's us, that's the attribution piece, we're sure, it's bad, and we can fix it. And we could develop a whole course to look at these different claims and provide evidence to support them. I wanted to show you the recent global temperatures. This comes from the NASA data set that has ocean and atmospheric measurements. And here on the x-axis, we have 1880 all the way to 2023 is the latest annual record. And this is temperature anomaly, or changes in temperature for the whole planet. And so you can see here on the top right that we broke the global average temperature record in 2023. And so as a good science thinker, I'm curious, I wonder why 2023 was warmer than 22, and why is it bouncing up and down a lot? So one thing I want to share with you was this website called Climate Reanalyzer. And this comes from the University of Maine. And if you're getting interested in climate stuff or you're interested in keeping track with the weather and climate data, this is a great site because they're just grabbing data from around the world. And just, I like some of their visual elements. So this is the daily global temperature of our planet. This is air temperature. So this is from weather stations around the world. And the orange line here was 2023. And you could see if you look at the orange line, and this is January here and December. And so as the year moves on, there's more land mass in the northern hemisphere. That's why we see the warmer temperatures in June, July, August, even though that's opposite in southern hemisphere. But you could see that especially from about June onwards, 2023 was by far warmer than any other year. The black line, the bolded black line here is 2024, and we've been above as well for some parts of the year, but not the whole year. So that's interesting. And this website's neat because I can look at other climate data. And it turns out the ocean is super important for, like, it's actually most of the heat coming from additional greenhouse gases gets absorbed in the ocean. So this is the same kind of graph, but now we're looking at daily sea surface temperature data. So we're looking at ocean temperatures. And you could see the orange line again from actually last year. And I was following this a lot from about March. We were like way warmer than any other year before. These are all the other years in the record back to 1981, and 2023 was like almost half a degree warmer, which is pretty shocking. And then 2024, we was again an early part of the year. Now we're kind of similar. So this website allows us to kind of like start asking questions and try to learn something. The last chart I'll show you is the North Atlantic. So that's one of the data pieces that they look at. And this might be the clue as to why we're having these warmer temperatures right now, in addition to climate change, which is going to slowly increase the global average temperature. So the North Atlantic is an area that we look at because the Gulf Stream interacts with that region quite significantly in the climate record. Again, this 2023 data, so much warmer than any other year before. And we don't know what's causing this. And there's a lot of research in that area right now. But we cleaned up ocean liners that are moving freight around and changed the type of fuel they're using. And that fuel doesn't produce as many aerosols that cool the planet. And so it could be this kind of like, oh, we cleaned up one thing to make air pollution better. And one of the outcomes of that is that it's warming up the ocean a little bit more. But we're not sure. So this is just to share with you that the climate system's complex, that there's some interesting websites where we can try to monitor and look at this, and that there's lots of areas of active research continuing in this space. So if you want to look at some of those things, keep track of our planet. Climate Reanalyzer is one of many nice sites. So going back to this framework, I became interested in the we're sure and is it bad and we can fix it. And especially I did a bunch of climate modeling where we looked at what's going to happen in the future. And so we basically have the observations. This is the observational record. And then we have all these climate simulations of the future. And we don't know what the future is going to be like because we don't know what kind of cars we're going to drive or how many people are going to be around or what kind of energy we use. So these are called different emission scenarios. And based on those scenarios, we get different global temperatures. And the red line is business as usual. If we don't do anything by 2100, we're 5 degrees Celsius warmer than pre-industrial, which would be a big, big disaster. Our goal really is this green line, and that is to stabilize the temperatures and then slowly reduce temperatures, stabilize our climate. And I think that's why a lot of us are here, is that we think we can get onto this pathway. And the question is, like, how do we do that? And there'll be lots of different ways. I'm going to talk to you about the academic research that I've been doing on education. And I was inspired by a quote. Eric shared another quote from Nelson Mandela, which is beautiful. This came from the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and it said, education is an essential element for mounting an adequate global response to climate change. And you'll see the word education used a lot. Actually, it's been the last 5 years, I would say, that we're now actually seeing educational programs coming through more. But it isn't always like that. And I'll tell you, at least in the States, that when you look at a climate action plan for a state or for a city or for an organization, you'll see this stuff: transportation, energy, buildings, food, water. But you will very rarely ever see anything related to education. And that's in part because education is challenging to measure. And I believe we don't have adequate data to justify some of the financial investments. Whereas if you install energy efficient light bulbs or solar panels, you know what the carbon reductions will be. So I came up with this question. The question that I had was, can we quantify the potential role of education as a mitigation tool? And I believe that if we could start to do that in different contexts, that then policymakers would start to see the value of it if we could demonstrate that it has efficacy, and we could start to make more progress. So I started this work in some classes that I was teaching. This is a university class where we were teaching climate change in a very deliberate way, where we use something called a project-based learning approach. And all that really means is that, when students engage with real problems in the world around them, they learn better, and that learning needs a purpose. So what we did is we took this course and we made this course kind of purposeful. And it was about action on climate change. That's what the course is about. And we gave students an opportunity to engage. We surveyed those students many years after they left the university, and we compared them to a control group, and we found that this type of educational approach, or this high quality climate change education, could be as effective in reducing carbon emissions based on individual behaviors, the cars people drive, the food people eat, how they use energy at home, that those reductions that individuals were able to achieve were just as effective as other kind of climate change mitigation measures, such as solar panels or electric vehicles. And in the Q&A, if you guys want to chat more about like how we actually did that, but we just used surveys. But this is one of only very few studies that have actually been able to demonstrate the reductions in carbon emissions associated with education programs. And we compared, we did these scenarios where we looked at, and actually we took data from this thing called Project Drawdown, and looking at these different large-scale climate solution strategies like rooftop solar, offshore wind, and our climate change education scenario, where if we were to scale this type of high-quality education in schools around the world, we could have could be just as impactful as other large-scale solutions. So we're not saying these other things aren't important, they're critical, but that, humans are important too. And often they're left out of this other pieces. One thing that I think would be interesting for folks here is that the reason we think this was important is that it's made climate change personal. It made it like personally relevant to individuals, and that the people who took this class compared to the control group felt that climate change was fixable, that their individual actions can make a difference. We'll kind of return to this in a couple minutes, because I think there's some, I think this is an important point. And we developed a model for, what is this educational experience? How could you replicate that? There were 4 elements that we found were important: this personal connection to the issue of climate, empowerment, like giving people an opportunity to do something in their own community, not just intellectually, but physically or, experientially. Social norms, if other people are doing it, yeah, that becomes normal. And then finally, developing some empathy for the environment or for people or for justice. Like that's where the heart comes in. And so those were what we found were key reasons why the type of educational experience we designed seemed to be impactful. And we continue to do research in this area, but it was really interesting for us. We wrote a paper on this, and I can share a link to the paper. We also made a documentary And this was screened on our public television channels around the country. And if anyone wants to watch the documentary, it's 27 minutes long, kind of describes and humanizes it. For example, Lolita Tracy, one of the students in the course, and we looked at her trajectory, and she works in marketing and advertising, but sustainability and justice are key elements of her, like, of herself. And she uses those in very interesting ways, and attributes. She said, oh, before I took this class, I didn't know anything about the environment. I didn't really care. So, you know, and since many of us have some experience in education, we know this anecdotally. We know how important education can be. And I think our goal is to have these type of experiences happen more frequently, and to scale them. So that kind of leads to the last point that I wanted to talk about, which was, like, after we did this academic research, you know, what was next for us? And for me, I was lucky that I ended up co-authoring a cookbook about food and climate change with Laura Steck, who's an environmental food activist and a chef and a teacher. And I was the only climate scientist she knew. So she said, hey, can you put some science into this book? And the reason the book was influential for me is that it allowed me to move outside of academia and talk to regular people. And so we gave lots of talks at, you know, at coffee shops and at libraries and at universities and schools about the connections between food and climate change, which are significant and also very personal to people. Food is a very, you know, personal, you know, what you eat and your relationship with food is something that's quite intimate. So one group of folks who weren't hearing this message, though, were young people. And so I started to work, I took the ideas from the book and I started to work with some filmmakers and storytellers and educators at San Jose State to try to tell stories about food and climate change and solutions in a positive, fun, and quirky way for kids. And they helped us invent this Green Ninja superhero, climate action superhero. And we, over the last decade, we make films about Green Ninja, and they're for younger audiences, of course. We made some games. We have a Green Ninja Film Festival. We just had our 11th annual film festival where students make their own Green Ninja inspired films. And some of the films include burritos. Not too many, but some. And here I am as Dr. Burrito. It wasn't my goal to be checking the carbon footprint of burritos for fun, for silliness. But here I am in the pursuit of education and humor. And here I am in a burrito farm. And I've just pulled this burrito out of the ground. Look at the deep roots in that thing. And this is just kind of silliness. And the goal is to try to lighten the mood about climate science for young people to make it more accessible. And that's one of the things we do at Green Ninja. The kind of tagline at Green Ninja, and Sue mentioned this, is purposeful science for student leadership and success. And student leadership is about doing something about climate change in your own community, in your own home, in your own school. And success is really about academic success, because you're not going to get a school to adopt a curriculum unless they're going to do well on their test scores. So you kind of have to have this kind of two frames. At least that's what we found. So we created this comprehensive middle school science curriculum. It's got, just like every other piece of curriculum, other publishers. And we decided, instead of giving it away for free, we would compete with large textbook companies for daily science instructional time. We've had some success in California, our home state. And here's some of the school districts that have adopted Green Ninja for multiple years. So we love working with schools. Some are in conservative areas, some are in liberal areas, rural and urban. And then I just thought I would share with you one little story, which I think you'll find interesting. So we, or myself, and like as one of the kind of leaders, decided, let's go to Texas. Texas is one of the largest textbook adoption states in the country. And let's see what they think about purposeful science for student leadership and success. And there's a whole year-long process about adoption and selection of textbooks in Texas. A report came out called Grading the Textbooks, about how the new Texas textbooks address climate change, and Green Ninja was on top. We were like superior, up there with McGraw-Hill. They liked how we did this. We went through a rigorous review through the Texas Education Department, and Green Ninja scored 100% on the standards and 100% on the pedagogy. And the Texas Education Agency recommended us for adoption. Unfortunately, that's not who decides who gets to sell textbooks in Texas. That's the State Board of Education. And those are political appointees. So there was 10 Republicans and 5 Democrats on that. And we did not get approved because of how we portrayed climate change. And probably because we're from California, and there's probably other reasons too. I'm a climate scientist. Others got approved and some didn't. And we were very disappointed. And this got quite a bit of press about how the Texas board rejected science textbooks over climate change messaging. So it's something to learn. Now, the good news is we're still able to sell curriculum in Texas. And here's some of our new school districts that will be using Green Ninja starting next month. And so that's really exciting. And we continue, we're not giving up. It's a setback, but we're all used to setbacks, right? Like that's part of trying to create change. So in terms of next steps for Green Ninja, we are focused on youth. We're focused on empowerment and leadership. And when we developed this little visual here, I told our artists, and we have these amazing artists, I said, I want a young girl with the cape, because I actually believe that girls and women are going to really be the leaders in our taking action on climate change. And there's some data to support this. And you can go out and find a variety of different pieces of data. This is from the Pew Research Center, which shows the gender gap on climate change in many wealthy nations. And so that, the expression global climate change is a serious problem, 17-point gender gap in the United States. Concern that global climate change will harm me personally, 8% in Australia, gender gap. People will have to make some major lifestyle changes to reduce the effects. You see double-digit gender gaps. So that's why when we think about how we develop them, we take extra steps to try to ensure that we're developing it with the best intentions in mind to assure that young girls especially get the type of content that they need to support them to move on into careers where they'll be able to be like Lolita, who I shared with you before, inspired, but having the right, good scientific background and inspiration and motivation to take action to make, to create a more just and healthy and clean society. So that's what I wanted to share with you folks. And I'm happy to take questions. And thank you so much for listening.
Well, thank you, Eugene. That was fantastic. We're going to go to questions now, straight without going to breakout rooms. And so how we'll do it is that Sandra will take questions on the chat line. We'll take questions from raising your hand. And if we still miss anybody, please let us know. Would anybody like to begin with a question? Or Sandra, have we got anything yet in the chat line? Otherwise,
yes, some people want to watch the documentary. So if Eugene can put that up in the chat, then they can click into that. And the other one is that they'd like to hear more about the cookbook, some more details about the cookbook. Could you expand on that, please, Eugene?
Sure, happy to. So, in this cookbook, what we were looking at, what Laura's kind of main premise, she's been a vegetarian a long time. And her main point was, at least in America, she's like, a lot of her friends and people we know if they were going to cut out meat, they didn't know like, what else is there to eat? And obviously they hadn't spent a lot of time. And I did this same thing with my students too. I'd sometimes say, I want you to live a vegetarian lifestyle for a week. and they'd come back and they said, gosh, I've had so many salads. I'm tired of salad. And then some folks maybe from India or something said, hey, I'm a vegetarian and I've never eaten a salad in my life, you know? So it was really like to try to provide folks with some recipes for what does it look like to, how would you season food to be as flavorsome, quote, flavorsome, as a meat-based meal, using what Laura called the condiment plate, or what foods, you know, could you substitute and swap out. And so we wrote this book in 2008, so it's been quite a while, and there's been lots more work, obviously, since then. But what I would say is that the reception around food is, I think, is very interesting and helpful, because if you talk to young people about, you know, taking individual action on climate change, if someone wanted to do something, you know, installing solar panels or electric cars, those cost a lot of money, and you might not have those choices every day. But your food choices are something you can do 3 times a day. And they can be related to issues of social justice. They could be related to issues about animals. They could be related to issues about the environment very easily. It's a total onion. You just keep digging and you just find how complex our food system is. And maybe it'll even lead some people to starting to grow their own food, just in a pot or something like that. And that can be a tremendous experience as well. So I did the science. So I had these little science sidebars in the book about climate and related to food in some cases, but not in all. And Laura told a story about her life, and then different recipes and under different themes. So and there's lots since then. There's been lots of other great books about food and the environment, which is a, you know, on the surface, when we go to the grocery store, we don't see those stories. We don't know. It's just based on packaging. But there's a lot in there. And I continue to be puzzled by our food system and intrigued.
Thank you. There's another question on how applicable is the Green Ninja project to other countries?
Yeah, it's we've developed this Green Ninja program for the science standards in the United States, but the approach would be totally applicable in other places. And that approach, the quick summary of it is, you know, a project-based approach where students work on stuff. They apply the science that they're learning, or the education that they're learning, to something local in their community. And then they actually they have some voice and choice in that solution. And that voice and choice, that gives them some agency. That gives them like some buy-in. And if the teacher will step back a little and say, okay, I'm going to let these students work on these projects. And if the teacher has the right educational tools to ensure that they're applying what they're learning, it can be amazing. And so project-based learning, also very similar to the International Baccalaureate, uses very similar principles, and that's all over the world as well. In fact, Green Ninja just did an alignment with the IB schools because of they're just so synergistic. And so I think that IB is one way that could be linked in other countries. And also at Green Ninja, we're happy to share like stuff with people in other countries, like, because the reason that our organization exists is that we want to do something about education and climate. So we're happy to share anything we know with folks anywhere.
I haven't seen any.
So Jen's got a question. Jen, would you like to ask your question? You're on mute too.
That was my question, and I really appreciate the answer. Thank you, Eugene.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else would like?
There's another question there. How do we get more men to care? Oh, can't quite see that. About climate and the future.
That is a very good question. I, I, I think I'm just thinking off the top of my head here. Going back to the model that we had, the empathy piece is, I think, really important. And, there's lots of nonprofits that try to take kids out into nature and give them an experience in nature. And I do think that, can be super helpful because, some men think they're supposed to be like strong and have a certain kind of like, position in the world. And yet I think if you can show people the beauty of nature, both men and both boys and girls, and give them a reason for, wanting to protect, and that there could be an intellectual like, oh, I like technology or I understand how things work. But I do think the empathy piece is something that we have not always given as much emphasis. And so even myself, I didn't grow up like this, but it's something you can learn and it can evolve. And we wrote a unit on monarch butterflies recently, and they have this long migration pattern. And now when I see monarchs, not only do I enjoy the science of them, but I just enjoy the beauty of them, and more strongly want to protect them in whatever way is possible. So I don't know if that answers the question directly just about men, and I don't think I have the background to be very articulate and offer anything, except to say that the data does show that girls and women seem to have a stronger connection to issues related to climate.
Sandra, are there any other questions? So Laura would perhaps like to make a comment. Laura, you just put into the chat line?
Yes, thank you, Eugene. I was speaking with a young man in Canada yesterday who's 15 years old, and he was quoting something. I don't know if this is true or not, but he was saying, well, here in Canada, we only account for 2% of the global warming. So really, if we do stuff, it doesn't mean anything. And I really liked the beginning of your presentation that talked about the personal impact and perhaps maybe educating more about the connection between personal action and global solutions. And I don't know whether you can speak to that or not.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I'll share with you that I'm lucky to be at a university where I get to hear what young people are like, their feelings about climate change. And there has been a shift recently that I've noticed, that some young people are saying, it's okay, maybe I should recycle more, or maybe I should be doing more things, but there's a systemic issue here that's going on, and that wasn't my thing, like I didn't participate in that. And so when students come and say those things to the professor, which I encourage them to, I offer them that I agree, like, you didn't choose the source of your energy from your utility, and you didn't choose wherever you happen to live, but we can be more thoughtful consumers, and that goes back to this, like, can individuals make a difference? So what I share with students is that, and there was a study in Nature magazine a couple of years ago that showed that you only need 20% of people to do things to switch, like to get a movement to start. You don't need 90% of people doing stuff before, it's this kind of like tipping point. Like, how many people need to wear their shorts a certain style, and then everyone starts to do it. So the question is, do you want to be a leader or a follower? And do you care about like the outcome of our society? So I've heard, when I lived in Australia, and their total global emissions are low as well. And yet lots of Australians feel like, oh, it's the right thing. We have to do our bit. We have to do our part. And so I think I think it's great that young person told you that. And I think our role is to help them think quite, broadly about what does that mean? And if everyone thinks in that way, are we gonna make any progress? But I think that from a personal standpoint, when people do come and say, okay, I would like to be involved, then that's the greatest starting point, because there's not just a simple thing. It's our whole life, and we'll have many decisions that we'll make in the future. But that's why we started with food, because it was an easy starting point that you get to decide every day. Like, you get to make a choice. And when you spend money, you're making a very deliberate choice. You're saying, I'm like, this is my thing. I'm giving you $5 or whatever it is. And I'm kind of like, I'm on board with that. And that can be a very powerful way to think about it with money.
I think that Julie's got a comment
Yeah.
or question. Yep. Julie?
Hi, sorry. I had to unmute and on video. Thank you, Eugene, for being here. Really interesting how you're approaching this. So as Zontians, we're always in our clubs and districts trying to educate others. And so my question to you is, how do you introduce or start the conversation about climate change when you have, especially in the US, it's everywhere really, people who don't understand it, they don't want to accept it?
Yeah. I think if you had someone who just didn't understand it, and was asking, oh, can you explain to me how this all works? And, oh yeah, I'd love to. That's great. I think probably the more relevant pieces that don't believe it, that are really like skeptical about this. And I'll be honest, I think the thing that's worked best for me is to listen, to try to understand, why they think that. And it usually isn't a science thing. It's usually, there's usually something else going on. And so climate skepticism could be related to, I don't want the government to have too much control, or I'm concerned about, that it might cost too much. And I think that trying to discuss that and to empathize with those ideas can be helpful. So as an example, one of my neighbors, nice guy, said, hey, can we go and talk about climate change? And I didn't know at the time that he was a skeptic, although I thought that might be the case. And I hardly said a word, to be honest. He just talked and talked and talked and talked. And then I said a few things. And his point at the end was, yeah, maybe there is something here, right? And it wasn't really, I wasn't like showing him charts and graphs or anything like that. It was for me to hear, or he was sharing why I was like, why are you kind of, what has made you skeptical about this? What have you heard? And now take that with a grain of salt. The people at the Yale Center for Climate Change Communication do this very sophisticated analysis about Americans' perceptions about climate change. And some of them say that those dismissive, the skeptics, just forget about them. They're only 10 or 15%, and just move on, focus on the other 85%. I would like to talk to those people. I believe everyone can be involved. But if you were launching campaigns, then you might then be more strategic in that. You might look at, you probably heard of the Yale Center for Climate Change Communication. It's a great kind of organization that's looking at this. And then Catherine Hayhoe, who's a climate scientist, who's also evangelical Christian, has done some great work in that space too. We're all trying to figure out how to talk to those folks. And I think and someone said active listening. I think being more engaged with people who may not agree with us is super important. As much as we can, try to do that.
Okay, Marinette, would you like to make any comment about your comment you've just put in the chat line? You asked a question.
Yes, I just ask the question because I saw when we are in society, it is a topic who regularly makes difficulties to speak together, because there are who understand there is something to do and who they don't understand, and it is difficult to make something together. And we saw that now with the young people who are very active with climate change. There are 2 or 3 years ago, and now they are the same who are going with plane to make a weekend and so on. There is something. I think there is something difficult now to engage a movement for all the society.
Yeah, it's a good point. And that I think what you're kind of describing is like, oh, am I better than you because I am doing something and you're not doing something? And there's associations of guilt. And so that's a good point. And I think that's like you've identified a real challenge. And we can't be perfect. We have to be human, and we have to be open to everyone and their individual situation. But maybe we can find common ground in that we care about the environment, we care about nature, we care about the next generation, about our parents and our children, and that we'll find ways to work together. So that is easy to say, a little harder to do. But maybe that's what the messaging that we need to try to think about is, how do we include everyone, or as many people as possible, or give them opportunities to say, yes, I'm involved too. It might be involved in a different way, or even I'm with you. Maybe I can't do everything you're doing right now, but I kind of have similar values. So we will see how that goes.
Any more questions before I wrap up? Okay. Eugene, we would very much like to thank you for your wonderful presentation today. For me personally, I've actually, even though I've heard your presentation before, I'm still taking away a couple of really good things, which is, one of them is about leadership, is that if we're actually teaching kids or people in any aspect of education, then that idea that leadership actually can become the norm. And I think that's actually a really attractive way to put it to people now. And another takeaway for me today is, even Eugene and I used to be bushwalkers together, and we both love the environment. But to actually put it in as part of education in terms of empathy for the environment, not actually just going out and suffering the environment or whatever on a school camp, but actually really understanding being in the environment and enjoying it, so that in fact it becomes something special that you want to protect yourself. I think that's a really good aspect that people need to consider for education. And your program is fantastic because, I mean, a lot of us are teachers here, and we know how powerful it is getting into a classroom and actually engaging with the kids. And I think you're exceptional because you not only can engage with one group, but you can engage with so many groups. And really, as you say, engaging with them and listening to them is actually going to get us further than actually trying to be totally negative all the time. So thank you. I owe you a responsible burrito in Australia or California. So very
Thank you,
much.
Sue.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for all the work you guys are doing. And if we have, I look forward to any kind of further follow-ons or questions or ways to work together. That would be wonderful. So you have my contact, and I'll share this presentation with your folks, including the links to the documentary.
Right, lovely. Thank you very much. So we're now going to head over to so Carol,
it's going to be Carol. Thank you, Sue. That's brilliant. You probably saw me on the telephone earlier on. That was Dilruba in Bangladesh. They've had a complete, there's a huge storm all the way through there. They don't have any internet connections or anything at all. So what it means is that Deepisha and Dilruba are unable to join us. They're both actually in Bangladesh at the moment. So what we'll do is I'll just flick through. I think many of you would have seen Deepisha at the International Convention. But what I'll do is I'll tee up with Deepisha to do a separate interview with her, and we'll put it onto the website later on so as you don't miss out. And so I won't forestall that. So what I will talk about now is what's ahead for the new biennium. And so we've been busy behind the scenes preparing for the biennium, and I just want to give you a quick overview. As you're aware, Zonta Says Now is our campaign for climate justice, and climate justice means that we put gender equity and human rights at the core of decision making and action on climate change. And the Zonta Says Now working group was set up to implement the recommendations in Zonta's statement on climate change. And these call on governments and members to take action around meeting obligations under the Paris Agreement and increasing awareness of climate justice, educating girls and encouraging them to pursue STEM careers and contribute to the global response to climate change, involving more women in decision-making so we have gender balance in governing bodies on environmental sustainability, and enabling equal economic opportunities by addressing the gender gaps, in particular, childcare, elder care, pay, anything that really is a barrier to women participating fully and equally in the workforce, in the economy. And also including women in disaster preparedness and planning so that our unique needs are met. So last biennium, we focused on developing materials for raising awareness and disaster planning. And this biennium will be focusing on materials that support women in decision-making and enabling their full participation in the economy. So that gives you where we're at. In the biennial goals, Zonta Says Now focuses on the four areas of advocacy. We have violence against women, climate justice, women in decision-making, and education equality. All of these areas are interlinked, which is why this year we're really working closely with the advocacy in all areas of Zonta. Zonta International is developing a training program that will help us all to be better advocates for gender equity. And we're also developing more national advocacy groups. So, and we'll have more Zonta Says Now think tanks or teams being formed to support them. For example, in Australia, Zonta Australia was launched at the convention, and we now have a Zonta Australia think tank. In addition, the new quarterly virtual advocacy series and the Remarkable Women Powerful Stories going on to a podcast format, as well as new quarterly stakeholder newsletters, will provide opportunities to include stories on climate justice for a wider audience. There will be 4 dates for shared activism during the year. And at the start of the year, we've got International Women's Day and Rose Day on the 8th of March. We have Earth Day on the 22nd of April. And these are great opportunities to spread the climate justice message. And at the end of the year, we have the International Day of the Girl Child on the 11th of October and the 16 Days of Activism in November and December. And this is when we focus on ending child marriage and ending violence against women, the Zonta Says No activities. So we also aim to increase our communication internally and externally through our connections with the African Union, Council of Europe, and country-based advocacy groups. And we also want to boost our valuable relationship with the Commission on the Status of Women. Our think tanks are where we come to learn about climate justice and things around the climate and environmental space, where we can share ideas and also inspire action. And this biennium, our meetings will be held in odd-numbered months and rotate through 3 time zones. Issues raised at the think tanks are shared with our advocacy teams to help them advocate locally, nationally, and internationally. And we'll develop tools to raise awareness of our climate justice issues on International Women's Day, Rose Day, CSW, that's the Commission of the Status of Women, and also on Earth Day. So we're providing materials that can be used in any areas of what we're doing. And at the end of the year, we can support our Ending Child Marriage and Zonta Says No campaigns. This is the structure of Zonta Says Now. It's a work in progress, but this is how it's shaping up. The engine room is our working group, and we're currently in the process of setting it up, and we aim to have representatives from all around the world. Within the working group, there's a small core team that reports directly to the international president, Salla Tuomonen in Finland. We've just heard this morning that our international board liaison will be President-elect Fernando Gallo-Freschi from Italy, and our Zonta headquarters liaison is Shannon Riley. With regards to advocacy, Bobby Cardillo has the role of making sure that Zonta Says Now works harmoniously with the International Advocacy Committee and the Zonta Says No working group. I'm really pleased to see that we have Helen Bowie here, who is the chair of the International Advocacy Committee. We have teams to manage the virtual art gallery, our social media messaging with headquarters, and to investigate potential alliances to magnify our voice with other like-minded organisations. And we're also setting up teams to host our intercontinental think tanks, ensuring that we can strengthen linkages between Global North and Global South. This biennium, we'll continue to review our toolkit, and this includes improving our website access, streamlining our social media processes, developing guidance for teams that host the intercontinental think tanks, and promoting the virtual art gallery as our major annual event, which is launched each year on Earth Day. And we'll continue to apply our framework for action when we develop materials to add to our growing list of resources. So what does it look like during the biennium? This is just pulls out the key areas. We've got a working group meeting every month to manage our tasks, and we have the intercontinental think tanks in odd-numbered months, and then we leave space for national groups to have their own think tank meetings in the even-numbered months. And you'll see that in the next 6 months, we've got 2 events, the Day of the Girl Child and the Zonta Says No, 16 Days of Activism. And so our key activities revolve around these. At the moment, we're setting up for the biennium with the working group, the think tank hosting teams. We're getting some early research done on decision-making and economic opportunity, so we can develop materials there. We're promoting the virtual art gallery. And then we want to make sure we get our messages prepared to support Day of the Girl Child and the 16 Days of Activism. And then we're investigating potential allies of organisations through whom we can magnify our voice. The next 6 months, you can see we've got the pattern working of the working groups and the intercontinental think tanks and national group think tanks. But then in the beginning of the year, we have the International Women's Day and Earth Day. And there's also the Commission on the Status of Women has their non-government organisation meetings in New York. So what we're looking at is sharing the the tools that we've developed, especially around decision making and economic opportunity, that can be used for International Women's Day, Earth Day, and area workshops, and also preparing podcasts so as we can work with the advocacy teams on podcasts and webinars. We're on themes around climate justice, and then upload our virtual art gallery in March, also it's all ready for April, and have a face-to-face workshop, we hope, with the CSW NGO New York. In April, obviously that's our Earth Day, we'll have our virtual art gallery showing and potentially a podcast webinar event going out around that time. And in May, we want to be able to have our tools for district conferences all ready to go out, so that you'll have resources that you can draw on, you know, short videos or presentations that can be used at district conferences. Year 2, it's a similar sort of thing, messages to support Day of the Girl Child in 16 days. And then in the last half of the last year of the biennium, it's the same sort of thing, refreshing our materials for Earth Day and art gallery for March and Earth Day events. And then finally, biennium finishes with presentations for convention. So that gives you an overview of how it sort of works into a sort of a rhythm. And so I think it's going to be quite fun putting all of these things together and just exploring the different ways that we can go. So we've got lots to look forward to. The other thing that's happening is the Summit of the Future. You may not be aware that this is going on. It's going to be held in New York in September. And Antonio Guterres says, we can't build a future for our grandchildren with a system built by our grandparents. I thought that was very good. The summit aims to turbocharge actions so that we can get the Sustainable Development Goals back on track for implementation in full by 2030. And the summit will produce a pact for the future. And it's based around these 5 chapters: sustainable development, peace, security, science, technology, youth and future generations, and transforming global governance. But in all of the chapters include human rights, gender, and sustainable development. So the Pact for the Future is also supported by a Declaration for Future Generations and a Global Digital Compact. And those will work towards intergenerational justice and protecting human rights online, among other things. So as we go into this biennium, we should really make sure that what we do, our advocacy, aligns with the information that comes out from the Pact for the Future. So I just want you to be aware of it and encourage you to go and check it out to see what's happening, because they talk about it being one of the most important meetings of a generation. So before we move on, do we have any other questions in the chat line, Sandra?
No, there's
nothing there. That's good.
Just comments, yeah.
Okay. Well, what I was just going to do is I just want a good opportunity just to give you some time just to think about what things have you learned from today's meeting and what excites you about the new biennium. So we'll just all, I was going to put you into breakout rooms, but there's not many of us, so I think it would be quite good to have a general discussion on it. So what has been your take homes from today's meeting? Open conversation. Anybody? Yes, is it Sue?
Are we doing a conversation or are we doing the chat? Sorry.
Sorry, I think we can do a conversation. Let's just have a conversation and we'll see how we go. Okay?
Then what I would say is I really enjoyed, Eugene, your presentation, and I'm really excited by the plan that you've just shared, Carol. I'm wanting to kick off, Zonta says now, committee in my district. We don't currently have one, and that gives me an outline for how to plan it. So I'm keen to have a copy of those couple of slides that you had, so that I don't need to reinvent the wheel, because that's really sustainable, and that's the story I'm telling.
Excellent. Yeah, one of the aims is that we have materials and tools, and we can cascade them out better, so that you've got some ideas. You're not working blind, and we need your feedback on them. If things work well, it's good. If things can be improved, it's all good to know. So we want to continually improve, and we're all learning by doing. That's for sure.
Yeah, and can I just say, it really beautifully supported the fantastic presentation at convention, and now I'm stopping.
That's fine. Did anyone else have any comments or contribution?
Me.
Yes, Sue.
Eugene's just about to leave us, but before you do, Eugene, I just want to actually answer both those questions you've asked Carol together. So actually, when you were talking about the next 2 years based on economics, and I actually think that today's presentation is really the foundation of that economics, because what Eugene was talking about was really how to help students to learn to make decisions. And it's actually decision making is really the basis of economics. It's about choice, as you mentioned, it's about opportunity cost. And also what's, I think, really exciting now is that there is a field of economics, behavioural economics, which really, I think, is incredibly important for in terms of education now, for us to know about that. And so I actually think we've done the first of the economic talks really for the next 2 years, really, because we've got to start literally with our children. We've got to teach them, our young people, how to make decisions based on accurate information, the value of their choices, and then the outcomes of their choices, what that influences, and the power of their choices, and thus the power of them. So, Eugene, you are definitely heading in the right direction for us in the next 2 years as well.
One of the things that we will be focusing on in the economics framework is donut economics. And we introduced this at the Commission for the Status of Women, wasn't it, Julie? From memory, yes. And that's a really interesting area, but we'll tell you more about that later on. And it gives a lot of opportunity for us to work in the future. Now, we've got Angela.
Yes, I'm real excited about the donut economics and how we can use the compass and use that to reflect on where we stand within the social structures within our own communities. But today, I'm really excited about how we can continue to have a conversation and help people understand that you don't have to convert anyone, just have a conversation. And I'm looking forward to leading that into being those thoughtful consumers.
Excellent, excellent. We can all make a difference, that's for sure. I can't see my chat line at the moment. Were there any other messages in the chat line?
No, but there's lots of congratulations in there.
Okay.
And thanking Eugene and you and Zonta Says Now, and thanking our presenters today.
Excellent, excellent. That's really good. As long as we yes, someone said yes. Where's that?
It's Helen here. I just wanted to congratulate you also, Carol. This has been a fantastic presentation. I think it is a very exciting new biennium coming up. I think the thing that you focused on, that, you know, having these 4 focus areas of, and obviously your Zonta Says Now is the climate justice, but there's huge overlap between that and violence against women, which is our Zonta Says No program, which has its own working group now as well. The women in decision making, which is obviously critical to the whole thing, both across Zonta Says No and Zonta Says Now, but for women's advocacy generally, and also education equality, which is something that has obviously been a highlight of today's presentation. And I think that all of those things weaving together and us all collaborating, including the other advocacy groups. So we've got the Council of Women and the African Union, and also the UN Committee with specialist roles in their advocacy. And bringing that all together makes it a very powerful story for Zonta International going forward in 2024 to 26. So I'm personally very excited, and yeah, thank you very much for today.
Right. Thank you, Helen. And Helen is the chair of the International Advocacy Committee. So that's really good. I'll just come back a little bit here to if there's no other questions. No, just to make sure there's no other questions anyone has. No, that's okay. Our next meeting is going to be on the 8th of September, and this one will be hosted by Zontans from North and South America. And you can register, and that one after that's in November, but you can register for all of the events at the zonta.org/events page at the Zonta International website. And I'm really pleased that you've all joined with us today, and I want to thank Dr. Eugene Cordero for his talk, and also to Eric and Sue and Sandra for co-hosting today's event. And I reach out to both Dilruba and Apisha, who are both unable to join us today. And if you have any questions or would like to be added to the mailing list for Zonta Says Now, please email us at info@zontasaysnow.org.au. And remember that through our gender equal climate action, we're building a better world for women and girls. So keep breathing, keep smiling, and have fun. Thanks very much, everybody.